Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angela Brogden and I am the Principal Scrutiny Advisor to the Adults Health and Active Lifestyle Scrutiny Board. Before moving to the formal meeting agenda, I have been asked by Councillor Helen Hayden, who is Chair of the Scrutiny Board, to relay her apologies for today's meeting. So in her absence, Councillor Paul Trustwell has been nominated to chair today's meeting. So please can I ask if all members are agreeable, and I will take silence as formal agreement. Thank you, everyone. So I can therefore confirm that Councillor Trustwell is formally elected as chair, and so I will now pass to you, Chair, to go through the formal agenda. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Angela. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the November meeting of the Adult Health and Active Lifestyle Scrutiny Board. Before we start the formal proceedings proper, for the benefit of members of the public who may be watching and maybe some officers who don't know all the members of the board, I'm going to ask the members of the board to introduce themselves, and I shall go through the list alphabetically. So we start with Councillor Caroline Anderson.
Sorry, Chair. I'm Councillor Caroline Anderson. I represent the Adlon Wharfdale ward.
And John Beale.
Good afternoon, John Beale. I am Chair of Health Watch Leeds and I'm a co-opted member of this board.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
Good afternoon, Councillor Judith Elliott, elected member for Morley South Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Harrington.
Councillor Norma Harrington, Wetherby Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Knight.
Hello, Councillor Christine Knight, Weekwood Ward.
Councillor Latty.
Good afternoon, Councillor Graham Latty, Guiseley and Norton Ward.
Councillor Leigh.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Sandy Leigh, Otley and Yeadon Ward.
Councillor Reagan.
Good afternoon, Councillor Reagan from Bermondsey and Richmond Hill Ward.
Councillor Renshaw.
Good afternoon, Councillor Karen Renshaw from Marsden Robin Hood, substituting today for Mohammed Iqbal.
Thank you, Karen. Councillor Smart.
Councillor Alice Smart from Armley Ward.
And Councillor Wenham.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Wenham from the Wronghay Ward.
Thank you. And I'm Councillor Paul Trustwell. I represent Middleton and Belle Isle, and I'm chairing today's proceedings. Normally, I'm just a member of the board. But obviously, as you've heard, Councillor Hayden has furnished her apologies. Okay, that takes us on to the first 5 formal items of the agenda. And can I ask Harriet Spate, our governance officer, to take us quickly through those, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals. Under agenda item number 2, there are no exclusions of the public today. Under agenda item number 3, there are no formal late items, Chair, but there is some supplementary information in relation to agenda item 9. A summary note of the Scrutiny Working Group meeting held on the 3rd of November that was circulated separately as part of a supplementary agenda pack. Under agenda item number 4, can I invite board members to please declare any disclosable pecuniary interests? Okay, I'll take that as none, thank you. And apologies, Chair, agenda item number 5. We've received apologies from Councillor Iqbal, with Councillor Renshaw here today as sub, and Councillor Hayden as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Harriet. And can I say that Councillor Iqbal is recovering very well at the moment, but reason for his absence today is that I think he's had a conflict of commitments. Okay, that takes us on to agenda item 6, the minutes of the meeting on the 20th of October. I will run through these page by page. Please speak up if you want to make any corrections or want to raise any matters arising. So on page 7, the first page of the minutes. Page 8. Page 9. Page 10. And page 11. Okay, in the absence of any matters arising or any corrections, can I take it that you're happy for me as the chair of this particular meeting to sign the minutes as an appropriate record?
Move
Or
on,
to
Chair.
recommend to the person who chaired that meeting that she should sign them as a correct record. I'm not absolutely sure what the protocol is, but I'm sure Angela will elucidate in due course. Okay, so that takes us on to agenda item 7, the Leeds Safeguarding Adult Board Progress Report. And basically this is, as it says on the tin, an update surrounding the work of the Safeguarding Adults Board. And we have a number of officers, and we also have the independent chair of the Safeguarding Adult Board, Richard Jones, CBE, I understand. Congratulations on that, Richard, whenever it was awarded. And he is going to be presenting the update. But before you do, Richard, I wonder if you could just introduce yourself, and then we'll go through the executive board member and the officers who are also in attendance for this item. So, Richard, if you could just introduce yourself at this stage.
Thank you very much, Councillor Trustwell. So my name's Richard Jones. I've met some of you before, and I think this is my 4th time probably at Scrutiny, because I've had the privilege of being your independent chair in Leeds for the last 4 or so years of the Leeds Safeguarding Adults Board. And I have a background in social work. I was a qualified social worker many years ago, and I've worked in the Department of Health. I was a director of adult social services, and I've worked in the NHS as well. So, and I now do a range of other things, and this is one of the things that sits on that list. So that's me, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you.
Yeah, welcome, Richard. And then I'll turn to Councillor Rebecca Charwood. Becky.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. And hello to Richard as well, and to the board. I'm very pleased to see the report, the annual report, and also the 3-year plan going forward as well, and looking forward to hearing what Richard has to say about it. It is an independently chaired and appointed board, and not managed through our processes in the department, quite rightly. So we're always interested to see what they find and what recommendations they have for us. Obviously, we work closely on the board with Richard and the other board members. So, but it is obviously an independent view, and we just welcome the report. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Becky. Then turning to Kath Roth.
Apologies, can't click my buttons fast enough. Good afternoon. I'm Kath Roth, Director of Adults and Health. Just to double check, you don't want me to make any remarks at the moment. Well, I presume the process is you're going to invite Richard to go through the report first.
Indeed.
Okay, thank you.
And then Shona.
Good afternoon, I'm Shona McFarlane. I am the Deputy Director for Adults and Health and a member of the board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shona. And Emma Mortimer.
Hello, my name's Emma Mortimer. I'm the Safeguarding Adults Board Manager.
Okay, thank you, Emma. Now, we have seemed to have got a panoply of other officers who are not down on my list of attendees. Could I suggest that rather than my trying to flick through the tiles on my screen and identify who you are, if you are referred to, or if you do come in to answer any of the questions from the board or to elucidate any of the issues, that you identify yourself at that time and say who you are. But please indicate that you wish to come into the discussion by raising your electronic hand. If you don't know how to do that, I think Angela can put very brief instructions up on the chat. So with that, coming back to you, Richard, to introduce the report, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. So there are 3 kind of elements that I'd like to just very quickly highlight, and then obviously given that this is a scrutiny process, we're really here at your disposal to answer questions and to hear your issues. But in relation to what's presented this afternoon, there are three things. The first thing is our annual report for last year. I think what I would want to highlight from that, Chair, is that we have made progress against our 4 objectives. We're keen to continue to be citizen-led, to listen and hear to what people are saying. We've developed an amazing group of people who are now ambassadors, people with lived experience, and on the front of the annual report, you'll see a picture of some of those people. Some of them, like Sioux and colleagues, are from Leap 1, who might be known to some of you as members of the Scrutiny Board, but we're doing a lot of work ensuring that we are driven by people's experience rather than organisational concerns and issues, and that's continued. And I think for me, the ambassadors have been the kind of real highlight of that 19-20 year. In terms of improving awareness, we're continuing, and I'll talk a little bit about COVID in a minute, but we're continuing to reach out to a whole range of different groups. What we know, and you'll see that in the annual report, is that the level of referrals, safeguarding referrals that come to Adults and Health as the lead agency, are increasing. In fact, they've increased from around 8,000 2 years ago to just under 10. Some people might say, goodness me, does that suggest that we're a city that is not moving towards being compassionate, but a city that continues to have huge challenges for individuals, vulnerable individuals and their families? I'm sure we are still a city that has people with those experiencing COVID hasn't helped. But I would also want to just underline that I think it's an indication of some of the improving awareness that we're doing and the confidence that third sector organisations and individuals can have because they know that actually this is something that's happening to somebody in their community that they need to do something about. It's very difficult to to ultimately work that out, but my view is, as your independent chair, is that that is much more about improving confidence and improving awareness. And I think the other thing just to say about figures is that overall, we are continuing to meet people's outcomes, what it is that they want to see happen as a result of being involved in the safeguarding process, and that we are mitigating and reducing risk. You can't always do that because sometimes we're working with people who have capacity and they decide that they'll continue to put themselves in a position where many of us would advise against because it will prejudice their welfare and their well-being, but actually they have capacity and we can't do anything more than provide advice, support and guidance. We can't take control. I think the other thing I'd just say about the annual report is that we've done a lot of work over the last 3 years on domestic violence, and in this year we did work around coercive and controlling behaviour, which is of significant interest to us as a board and a set of partners, and focused in on just keeping frontline practitioners equipped and skilled to use the legal frameworks that are available that can assist and support keeping people safe. And the other thing to say is that we've undertaken 2 safeguarding adult reviews, which were completed in last year. They both were in relation to serious self-neglect. We are still working with Safer Leeds and the Children's Partnership around a young man called Jason Berling, who has been subject to a lot of media attention, and we're now in the process of putting that report up to the Home Office before we finally publicise it. And the Executive Board of the City Council a couple of weeks ago took a report that we commissioned on people living street-based lives who'd suffered, who'd died as a result of partly as a result of their lifestyle choices and living on the streets, and lots of work to flow from that. So there's lots of ongoing learning. So that's what I would say about 1920. In terms of the next report you have in front of us, our plan for 2023, that's the next 4 years of our strategy. we're doing quite a lot of work on just reviewing how we work. Are we as good a board as we possibly can be for the vulnerable citizens that we're here to serve? And we think there's some work we can do on that. We are moving on working more closely with housing providers and wanting to raise the way in which they and safeguarding across the city is improved. We want to work differently with third sector colleagues, and we're talking to third sector, Val and a whole range of other third sector colleagues about how we do that better. And we're focusing on self-neglect and on driving our priorities on the back of intelligence. So we've got a huge performance dashboard that's been put together in the last 12 months that is starting to enable us to look at emerging trends and emerging issues. And then finally, Councillor Trustwell, and I'll be quiet, on COVID-19, just as I think you've looked at in relation to other services over the last few months as a scrutiny committee, we as a board have looked at what has been the impact of COVID-19 and what we and doing that with our partner agencies, and now in the process of beginning to think about for our plans for next year, how do we take that learning and act upon it? And I think what I would say about that is that we have seen initially a reduction in activity, but that has begun to get back to normal levels. But within that, we are seeing increasing levels of domestic violence. We're seeing increasing levels of complexity, and we have seen, and there's been engagement with commission services, care and residential settings, some instances of just how through the work that they've had to do, at times perhaps the voice and the issues and the needs of some of those people in those services haven't been as well met, and there's action underway to deal with that. What I think we found is that working has been driven to be much more integrated and collaborative. So it didn't need a crisis to do that because that was already emerging, but it's thrown people together much more effectively. It's meant we've had to use IT. I think it's left us with concerns about some of those situations, some of those citizens that you only get to see if you're an estate manager and you're out on calls and you're into people's homes, or you're talking to people just on the street and picking things up, whether you be a frontline health worker or a member from the voluntary sector or a housing manager, as I say. So some of that, I think, has just reduced our ability to reach into some of those situations where people will find it very difficult to speak up and step out and declare what it is that's happening to them. And I think the other thing that I would say is that we have seen, a significant impact on the health and well-being of frontline staff, and just in terms of their resilience and their capacity, and lots of fantastic things going on to do that, and great stuff happening in the third sector, which Leeds commissioned to be a kind of first kind of port of call. And we've seen some great examples of how that has actually reduced the need to then get involved in a more formal way, because things haven't escalated in that way. So COVID has been a real challenge, and Kath's on the call, Shona's on the call, other colleagues who are delivering and managing frontline services are continuing to face that challenge. I think as a board, we've reviewed what's been going on, and we feel a level of assurance that actually people's needs are still being met, notwithstanding the fact that actually people can't get into care homes and residential homes because of the issues around infection. People can't get into some of those places that we would expect interactions to generate issues and concerns, and that's something we have to continue to stay alive to. So I think I will hold it there. That's enough really from me, but those were the three kind of elements I wanted to speak to, Councillor Trustwell. Thank you.
Okay, Richard, thank you very much for that very cogent and focused introduction. I've not got any indications that any of our top table, so to speak, the officers want to contribute at this stage. So I'm going to bring in Councillor Knight, who indicated some minutes ago that she wanted to make a comment and ask a question. Christine.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have three questions, actually. The first two are around understanding the details of the report, to be honest. So my first question is, you referred earlier to Table A graph on page 32, which shows a massive increase in safeguarding concerns, which is probably what you would expect, actually, this year. But on page 23, it refers to a decrease in safeguarding concerns raised. And I just wondered if you could explain the discrepancy there. I don't know, it's just my understanding of my reading of it. The second question is, again, on page 32, graph B is regarding the nature of concerns. And I just wondered what is classed as domestic abuse as opposed to the other things that are listed there, because I would have thought the last 4 items on that list are examples of different types of domestic abuse. So I just wondered how you separate domestic abuse from the others, and whether domestic abuse itself requires further separation, whether you can elaborate on that. And my third question is whether you get many cases of cuckooing, and if so, how is that dealt with? Because I know that is a very tricky situation, and I'd be interested to know how that's dealt with. Thank you, Richard.
Okay, thanks very much, Christine. And before you respond, Richard, and any of the officers, could I just interject a question relating to Councillor Knight's first question? The figures that we've got, which to some extent you've explained, Richard, but are these all individuals, or will some people actually have been repeat victims or fall into a number of categories? So, Richard.
Okay, well, thanks for both of those questions. So to Councillor Knight, the safeguarding concerns relate to, so you're right, there's two figures and they're not the same. So that first one on that table, which flags up that in 1920 we had 9,777 referrals, it was for that year ending the end of March. What we say in the report is that in relation, so apologies if it's not clear, in relation to this year, and particularly the first period of COVID lockdown, referrals reduced before kind of beginning to pick up again. So they're not the same. So that the first point is about just an increase in referrals to the end of 1920. And then at the start of this year, so when we bring our report next year, you'll see, and perhaps we can map it out for you, just the kind of trend in referrals, because it's gone down. It's got more people are referring with higher degrees of complexity and higher levels of domestic violence, but it's beginning to move back. And Shona might be able to say something later about just where it's at the moment. Put her on the spot on that one. But as a board, our quality and performance subgroup are looking at that kind of trend information all the time, and we can tell you, if that would be helpful, just what's happened so far this year, and we can give you that information or incorporate it into the minute with Angela's support. On the second issue, I might need a little bit of help here from Emma, because in terms of the nature of concerns, what I think we've got there is in relation to domestic abuse, that will be how the referral has identified what was the primary concern. So if it related to somebody's safeguarding concerns as a result of what was happening to them, which looked as though it was happening within their home, within their family arrangements, maybe not somebody living with them, but somebody known to them, that might well have been coded as domestic violence. What we do know is that that though there'll be all sorts of issues in there around psychological abuse, sexual abuse potentially, and physical abuse. So if I'm not making myself totally clear, Emma might want to jump in. Emma, can you jump in? Because I'm not sure. I think it's how it's coded at the point that the referral kicks off. But Emma, just
yes,
say.
thank you, Richard. So the categories that are listed there within the annual report are actually set out by the government, the Department of Health and Social Care. So there is an annual return that is sent to the government that sets out the number of referrals and so on against each of those categories. So that's how those categories have originated. In terms of separating them out, the domestic abuse category, as Richard said, is about the primary area of concern that has been identified. But quite often, as Councillor Knight has pointed out, somebody may well be experiencing domestic abuse that will also incorporate physical abuse, psychological abuse, and so on. But it's about the primary concern. And the other issue is that often people will be experiencing levels of abuse that actually are not around domestic abuse, but are experienced in other settings and in other circumstances, which are then recorded as being the primary area of abuse. Does that help at all?
I'll see what Councillor Knight has to say. Yeah, does that help, Councillor?
Christine, do you want to come back?
Yes, I think it does. So I think basically what you're saying is the domestic abuse is completely separate to the other. But there may be elements of those others within the domestic abuse situation, but it's what it comes to you, how it's referred to you initially. That's how you determine which category to put it in. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, that makes sense.
Emma. And then I've just forgotten I know I'll come back to the cuckooing issue, but just Councillor Trustwell, apologies, I didn't write down your query. So can you just...
It was just coming back to what the statistics that are given on page 32 actually represent. So is every one of those an individual case, or are some people multiple victims falling into a number of categories, or repeat victims within a category? Sorry, is that...
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. I just lost it for a second. So no, it's not. There will be people who appear several times in those referrals, because what it's counting is not the numbers of people, but the numbers of referrals. So you're absolutely right to assume that there will be some people about whom Adults and Health will receive a number of referrals. Maybe in relation to the same incident. There'll also be people who, as a result of what's happening to them, are subject to multiple referrals throughout the year because, as I talked about earlier, they might have capacity to make decisions, but actually are making very poor decisions for themselves. So, so that 9,777 won't be that level. Won't be that. That isn't a measure of the number of people, it's the number of referrals. And again, if you're interested, we can find a way of presenting, well, exactly how many people are we talking about then?
I think that would actually be very useful, because repeat victimisation and multiple victimisation, I think, would give us an insight into just how intense some of the pressures are that people who make these complaints are under.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then Councillor Knight's third question is around cuckooing, which I'm so just for everybody's benefit, I think we're talking there about people who are vulnerable, who find themselves either inviting people into their homes or into their networks and are financially abused, physically abused as a result of people who are actually kind of part of their kind of home arrangements, or not necessarily always living there, but dropping in and targeting. So sometimes invited, but sometimes absolutely targeted by local networks, criminal networks at times, in terms of taking advantage of somebody who maybe doesn't have some of the life skills to make good decisions again. So that does happen. It's quite a common feature in some of our referrals. It was what I talked about, 2 of the Safeguard Adult reviews we did last year. It was an element in one of those reviews for an individual who was targeted by by people around drugs and accessing their money. Slightly aside to that is the whole issue around financial abuse and scamming, which again we're doing a whole lot of work alongside partnerships across West Yorkshire. So it is a feature without a shadow of a doubt, and for some people, so some of our work with Leap One, who are a group of citizens with learning disability, then for them it's something they've actually done a rap about in terms of MATE, so it's hate crime, and then as a result of a protected characteristic, but there's also MATE crime too. And if you've gone to their website, you'll find an amazing rap that they've done to just talk about how you stay safe and make sure friends aren't going to abuse you. So it's a piece of work that lots of providers in the city are working on, lots of third sector organisations are working on, but it's a feature of what happens in our communities, and you as local community elected members will be aware of that, I'm sure.
Okay, thanks for that, Richard. Denise.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm quite aware that abuse can take many forms and it can happen anywhere. Is there anywhere in the report that identifies geographically where we've got more referrals of different types of abuse coming in, so that it can maybe be put down to areas of inner cities, or I want to find out where these referrals and this abuse is actually taking place, so that we can maybe then look at some of the causes and try and find some solutions.
So we don't present our data in that way, and I think if we looked at it, what we would find is that it's actually a feature right across the city of Leeds, from Morley. I know we've got a councillor from Morley, right out to Wetherby and places. So, and we did some work on a referral a year or two back where two professionals, two doctors in a next door home heard abuse going on in a case that we then had a tragic outcome and did nothing about it. So this isn't confined by, so if you looked at, so if you map some of the inequality across the city, which you will do in relation to skills, employment, health outcomes for people, you will have your hotspots. I think that what I'd say is that we know that this is an issue that affects all communities and all kind of socio-economic groups within communities. Some people are more able to ensure that some people have other resources to keep the door closed on us at times, but this is something that will happen across all communities in Leeds. And secondly, what I would say is it's also something that happens in all settings. So it happens in commission services, which is not where we would want to see that happen, but a significant number of referrals come from people who are already known to statutory services across the city because they're vulnerable already. But this is something that happens across the piece. And what we could do, Councillor Reagan, is, we could break down our referrals, and I'm happy to, I know I'm giving out lots of jobs at the moment to people like Emma and probably colleagues in Kath's directorate too. But as I say, I think the starting point is that if you overlay deprivation, you might see some kind of linkages, but it's not, it doesn't stack in the way in which health outcomes would do, or other issues do for for communities that are under stress and struggling. So, but happy to try and provide that information, Councillor Reagan. But it
Can I come back, Chair?
Of course you can, Denise.
Yeah, I'm well aware that you know, abuse and these referrals come from all settings in all areas. I was a child protection officer within the for the council in my years of work, so I'm quite affair with all that. But what I'm wanting to get at is, are we having more referrals from a certain area so that it then tends us to look at what provisions are in that particular area where we can try and work a solution around why we've got those referrals.
Okay, thanks. Richard?
No, I mean, nothing else to say. I think
okay,
we can go away and look at that information for Councillor Reagan and come back. I mean, I think the nature of, and I'm not assuming, people have got a whole range of different lived experience that I'm talking to here, but the nature of some of the experience that people have is that it's most of it happens for people from people they know, as it does around child protection as well, and it happens in places where people are very vulnerable and struggle to have their voice heard, and will struggle to be able to protect themselves. And I think the other thing we know, and it's information we talked about last year, I'm sure at Scrutiny, was the variation between different groups across the city. So different ethnic groups across the city, we will see different levels of referrals from, and we are feeling positive about the fact we're seeing increasing levels of referrals, as I said earlier, but also from communities that we're seeking to reach out into, for whom actually there are probably some further barriers and steps to take before people can feel confident and clear about what it is they need to do to protect other people and protect themselves. But yeah, we can have a look at that data and think about how we present that to you.
Okay,
yeah,
thanks, Richard.
Add another point, please, Chair. Sorry, could I just add?
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Just to say,
of course, Emma.
Thank you. It was just to say that the board is undertaking a significant piece of work at the moment in terms of its quality assurance role, and there will be a lot more detail, I think, in next year's annual report than there is in this year. So I think quite a lot of that work in terms of quality assurance, performance management and self-assessment by individual agencies will probably meet some of Councillor Reagan's questions, I think, and address some of those concerns.
Okay, but presumably the information that you volunteered, Richard and Emma, as a result of Councillor Reagan's questions can be provided to us fairly rapidly as a follow-up to this meeting.
We'll certainly take it away and see what we can provide.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just having a look at the people that you've actually consulted, and you said, Richard, that you had worked out across the whole area. There is only actually one place mentioned in the report about the safeguarding and training, etc., and that was Mason House, which, albeit yes, it's a small centre within the housing offices, it doesn't have a very big reach in the Wetherby area. There's nothing about Otley. I know that Councillor Lay's on the call as well today, but there's nothing about the outer areas. And I get Denise's point about this kind of safeguarding issues arise in all areas across the city, but there doesn't seem to be much evidence in the report of any consultation and training and safeguarding training. None of the neighbourhood networks in the outer northeast have been mentioned. So I'm just a little concerned that the outer areas, once again, get kind of left off and missed off. So the information that you're going to provide in response to Denise's questions, I think, are particularly pertinent to the outer areas too, so that we can see what help is required in the outer areas and how we can actually raise the profile of safeguarding in those places. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, there's always more that can be done. We've got there's a finite capacity. I think if you look at some of the work's been done around supported housing, retirement living, then we are out all over the shop. But I think what I hear you saying is think about those neighbourhood networks. Let's make sure we're reaching out to all of them. And what I think this report does is it captures some of the kind of highlights. It doesn't try and set out everything that's been done, but I think it's a good reminder to me as chair of the board, Councillor Harrington, to just go back and make sure that, yeah, when it comes to those key points, and the neighbourhood networks being one of them, that actually we've reached out and continued to ensure that we're there on those agendas and having those conversations. So I think that's a really helpful reminder for me.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Judith Elliott, you had your hand up and then it was taken down. Do you want to make a contribution?
Yes, I would, please.
Fire away.
It was really a comment, but then Denise came back and said she understood that it was across all peoples and all society, these problems. And my comment was that 2 years ago or more, I contacted our cluster leader in Morley to see what was happening within our schools. And this came up then, the problem in homes. And I said, oh, and I mentioned a deprived area. And she said to me, oh, no, it's not just the deprived areas. It's the whole way across society where these problems are. So what Richard is saying, I'm just saying that I already had that from Helen. And when these things are reported to the clusters, they take them then, because the schools know quite often what's happening. So the schools are a good place as well for people to be able to know what's going on. And our clusters seem to be well up with this. So the clusters are somewhere else, perhaps where Richard could look to for information. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Judith.
So,
I think it's just a case of acknowledging that, Richard. John Beale.
Thank you, Chair. Can I preface my comment by declaring that I am an active member of the Church of England, but nationally there has been a lot of reporting about both sexual and physical abuse within particularly the Anglican Church and the Roman Catholic Church. So my question is, has there been any sign of that from either the Christian or other faith communities in Leeds?
So what I'd say is that, yeah, absolutely. There has been the inquiry into child's sexual abuse is still reporting, isn't it? And you know, it's reported recently in the Roman Catholic Church. It's reported, as you say, on the Church of England. Other denominations have set out their plans. That's been specifically in relation to children, young people, and hasn't had a focus on vulnerable adults as such. So what we are doing in Leeds is seeking to reach out to all communities, including faith communities as well. We've had some engagement with some of those communities, particularly communities for whom the whole notion of safeguarding is quite difficult to understand. I mean, it is for anybody just off the street, isn't it? When you talk about child abuse, people kind of understand that. It's had a profile, they get it. When you talk about vulnerable adults and human trafficking or domestic abuse, I think people kind of have a sense that actually those things shouldn't be happening to people, but understanding what they then do and how they use their community networks to engage and use their community to engage is part of the kind of work that they've got to do and we've got to do. So the inquiries that you're talking about specifically had a focus around children and young people, and each of those large religious denominations have now got plans in place and have their own approaches to safeguarding that absolutely takes the learning from the work that's been done around children and progresses it into how they protect adults and vulnerable people as well. So we're here to support all that kind of community activity, whether it be faith-based or non-faith-based. So I think that's what I'd say, John, to the issue you've raised. And you know, we've got a long way to go in many respects still, in terms of understanding, confidence, making sure that what we do is appropriate to the different communities that make up a diverse and vibrant place like Leeds.
Kath, did you want to come in on this?
Can I just come back very quickly?
No, I'll bring you back, John, after Kath, but I think Kath indicated she might want to be responding to your question.
It was just to add an extra to what Richard said. What we are doing is working with adult survivors of child sexual abuse. So our children's colleagues might have dealt with the initial abuse that's happened, but we see quite a significant number of individuals who have been very severely harmed by their childhood experience, and that carries them right through into the adult life with some quite profound mental health problems, traumatic stress disorder, sleep disorders, impacts their personal relationships, and their lives can be extremely difficult. So that's just one side of a wider safeguarding role that we would play.
Thanks, Kath. John, would you like to come back?
Yes, I need to thank both Richard and Kath for their comments, but just to note that although much of the abuse was to children, quite a number of the abuse cases has in fact been to adults. So we can't ignore the fact that there are adults who've been abused, not just children who've grown up into adults, still bearing the effects of previous abuse.
Thank you for that. Christine, you wanted to come back in again.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, in relation to the self-awareness sessions that you've been doing with different networks, are they still ongoing through COVID? I mean, are you doing them remotely, for example? And if a need in a ward was identified, can third-party organisations contact you directly to arrange sessions? Is that something that's possible?
Yep. Absolutely, Councillor Knight. So you know, we're trying to reach out into networks, but we're using existing networks and people who can signpost us into opportunities. So absolutely, please get in touch with the board. So we have a web page, so just you can use that to contact us, or just pick up Emma's email as emma.mortimer@leeds.gov.uk. That's one way of doing it. We've had to shut down some of that activity, and obviously the face-to-face stuff has stopped, but it's not stopped us continuing to work with the ambassadors, who are representatives from people with lived experience. All the work that we've done in just reintroducing a whole set of new public materials that we can bring to sessions of that sort. So yeah, very happy, Councillor Knight, to pick up any suggestions you might have as to how we engage with groups that you'll know about that we won't.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Richard. I've got no other notifications before we move off this point that I'd want to ask a few questions in my own. Many of them have been covered by questions that have been raised by other board members. My first question is, Richard, does the board carry out any sort of audit of the safeguarding processes of its constituent partners, or do you leave that very much to either themselves internally or to the other agencies to which they are kind of subjected and accountable? The second is the report actually talks positively about the lasting power of attorney, but have you picked up through the complaints process any attempts to actually abuse that as a means of control over individuals? And my final question relates to scams, and more in the context of the heavier end of doorstep crime. Some years ago, I worked very closely with trading standards nationally and locally regarding doorstep crime relating to cowboy builders, and one of the cases that really threw it into sharp relief was of an 84-year-old lady who lived in Crossgates called Isabel Gray, who was the subject of a number of cowboy builders, but then someone took it to a further stage, broke into her home, tortured her, murdered her, and it did lead to, at that time, calls for legislation to prevent people cold calling for the purposes of offering building services. Now, that's a very extreme case, but to some extent, the whole issue of doorstep crime, especially when it leads to violence and the sort of abuse that we were looking at that time, is that still a major issue? Is it still one that we're trying to get to grips with partner agencies like the police and trading standards, or is there less of it reported at this present time?
So, in relation to audits, which are one of the ways, obviously, that you get assurance that what you set out. So the board has a set of policies and approaches and procedures, and our job across the partnership, and that's why I have an independent chair, I think, is to challenge and ask questions about, well, are we learning the things we need to learn, and are things happening in the way in which we've said they should happen? So what we tend to do, there's a mix. So what we do, Councillor Trustwell, is we use individual agencies' own approaches. So whether it be an NHS trust or the CCG or Adults and Health, we've taken reports from all those partners and others too about the audit work they've done. So we've done, Shona and colleagues have done audit work on referrals that don't get further actioned, and done some deep dives into what's happening there and is it appropriate. And those issues are then reported back to the board, as do health colleagues when they look at a serious incident or a near miss. We have now just started a process of board level audit, and I'm really pleased about that, because it enables us to start to say, okay, well, individual agencies are doing their own pieces of work, but then at a board level, we can look above that, and we're just doing a piece of audit work, just starting off an audit on people's experience of what happens to them in the safeguarding process. Do they get the advice we'd expect them to get? Are they being positively encouraged to refer themselves to an advocacy agency for support if the criteria are met, and that would help. So we will have a blended approach, individual agencies doing their own pieces of work that enable us to ask questions on the back of the evidence that brings, but then a board level approach to audit, which is something I'm really keen that we now progress, and a lot of good work has been done by colleagues from a range of agencies who sit on our quality and performance subgroup. In terms of the lasting power of attorney, I can't comment directly this afternoon about are we finding examples of how, in what we know is that Leeds has done a lot of work and has been a bit of a national pilot for the changes that have taken place around some of that legislation. I think you're reflecting a kind of concern that, hang on a minute, but if that is then abused and used by people to take control in ways that aren't appropriate, how do we manage that? And that will be there will be instances of that. I can't refer anything to you at the moment, Councillor Trustwell, but we know that that is an issue that people have to be alive to. And in terms of scams, well, we do an awful lot of work led by colleagues in Safer Leeds, led by West Yorkshire Police and Trading Standards. Some fantastic work done at a regional level by Trading Standards, which we've resourced as a board in past years, and we get annual reports back from that work to the board in relation to the trends that are happening. And I'm afraid that you cited a very, very tragic case, but what we know through the COVID period too is that instances of financial scamming are increasing. People are increasingly vulnerable to a whole range of activity, and there's a huge amount happening on the other side of the fence, led by the police Trading Standards around disruption of networks. So we know that as a result of some of those investigations, lists of names of people from the West Yorkshire area and from Leeds are being traded across criminal networks, and people continuing to be approached and pressurised and scammed along with the doorstep stuff that happens too. So I think the reality is, as the financial climate kind of gets tougher for numbers of people, criminal networks step up their operation and step into new places. So we work very closely with Safer Leeds, with Trading Standards and the police force, and will intervene when that then becomes a safeguarding concern. But we work collaboratively on this. It's something that absolutely isn't going away, and there's been some great work done, but it's the challenge and the threat continues to develop, I'm afraid.
Thanks for that reassurance, Richard. Yes, it was that cynical trading of names that came out during the debate to which I'm referring, and obviously people like Isabel Gray had been serial victims. They'd been identified as older people keeping large sums of money in their homes, and that's what led to the break-in and her unfortunate demise. And the most sickening element of it of all, and I'll end on this, was that the perpetrators had not the slightest compunction about doing it, and really talked about how they could smell money in an old person's home. So that's why I was seeking reassurance that there is still that partnership focus on dealing with it. Right, okay, so with that, I don't see any more indications, and I'll bring this particular agenda item to a close and thank all of the participants, Richard, Emma, and the officers for their attendance and their contribution. And we look forward to A, receiving the information that's arisen as a result of the requests of members, and B, I'm sure seeing you again in due course. So thanks very much, everyone. So moving on to agenda item 8, the Active Leeds update, which is exactly that. I'm not going to spend any time really introducing it. We've got Councillor Rafiq as the Exec Board member, and I think 5 officers. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. And then we've got a couple of presentations from Steve Baker and Jill Keddy. So welcome. Mohammed, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Councillor Mohammed Rafiq, Exec Board member, as you chaired already said, for Active Lifestyles.
Okay, thank you. Then I've got Phil Evans.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Phil Evans. I'm the Chief Officer Operations in City Development, who is currently looking after Active Leeds.
Okay, thanks. Then Steve Baker.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stephen Baker. I'm the Business Manager for Active Leeds.
And then Natalie Kujenvan, if that's the correct pronunciation of your surname, Natalie.
Thank you, Chair. It's Kujenvan. Good afternoon, everybody. I am the Operations Manager for Active Leeds.
Okay, thank you. You'll remain Natalie then from now on. Jill Keddy.
Hi, I'm Jill Keddy. I'm the Development Manager with Active Leeds.
And finally, Katie.
Hi, Katie Bowden, also Development Manager within Active Leeds.
Okay, thank you. Steve, the floor is yours. And are we getting the overheads up, Angela, or not?
I will try that, Chair. So hopefully
All
this
right,
works.
okay.
So just bear me a sec. Hopefully everyone should be able to see that.
Can everyone see that?
Yes.
If you can't, shout up.
Yes.
Fine. Okay, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So today I just wanted to kind of give a bit of an update of all the work that Active Leeds have kind of been doing over the last year or so, and obviously kind of touching on kind of the pandemic kind of response that we've kind of been able to take part in as well, to try and encourage obviously physical activity through this period of time, which has been kind of its own challenges in there. So I'll kind of go through some quick updates in terms of those, conscious that everyone has already kind of seen the kind of presentation and hopefully kind of read that detail as well. So I'll quickly run through that more from the public's perspective, but obviously then I'll kind of have a bit of a break at the end of my presentation for any questions that you might have in terms of some of the detail in terms of any of those parts that I kind of run through. So today I just wanted to, like I said, go over a kind of update of Active Leeds and the work that we've been doing, but specifically focus on a kind of the pandemic side of things in terms of physical activity, just to give you an update on that. But then I'll hand over to Jill, who will give you a bit of an update on the Get Set Leeds and the physical activity ambition work. And obviously throughout this kind of period, we'll be kind of touching on in terms of physical activity and the opportunities that kind of do exist, but obviously there's been a number of challenges in terms of the COVID side of things, and obviously the impacts on physical activity as a whole during this period of time. And obviously as part of that, we kind of need to recover not only pre kind of activity levels, but obviously start making inways into improving those activity levels across the piece as well. So in terms of early years wise, I'll kind of break it down into kind of periods of time, just to kind of show you the amount of work we have been doing over this period. But it's probably fair to say the early part of the year, we were probably seeing the best we've ever achieved in a number of factors. You know, in terms of physical activity levels, they were continuing to increase, and inactivity levels were decreasing. So from that side of things, it is really positive. Also, to correspond to that, Active Leeds, we're kind of experiencing the highest kind of membership levels we've ever had, at over 24,000 kind of health and fitness members across the piece. Children on our Learn to Swim programs were continuing to increase month on month. We're getting over 11,000 kind of children to learn on our swim programs as well. And the financial side of things was positive through this period of time as well. So it was all very rosy at the beginning of the year. Along with kind of number of kind of funding elements that we were able to kind of get in as well as part of all the work that the development team kind of do during this period as well. So there was a number of kind of positives that we kind of had during this period of time. And then obviously as the pandemic started to kind of hit, we kind of saw our kind of usage across the leisure centres specifically kind of start to decrease. And then obviously we took the decision as the council just to kind of cease all kind of activities in terms of our side of things on the 17th of March, which included all the closures of the leisure centres during this period of time as well. So there's a number of things which obviously we had to kind of get in place during this period and kind of get synced up to. Obviously no one was kind of expecting it in a way, but we kind of did plan knowing what might come through this period. So all our communication wise with all our customers, we kind of did. Obviously in terms of the leisure centres, we had to safely make sure those sites were closed down, but still kind of maintain kind of building checks and maintenance that we needed to do during this period of time. And then also staffing wise, we need to kind of mobilise them to be able to work from home, but also could they support other services areas as well, which I'll go into shortly. And then we started to look at actually what could we do. So we kind of looked at in terms of the digital side of things more than anything else. We are probably first kind of local authority to kind of look at that side of things and just make some inways in there. For example, by the kind of week later, once we've obviously closed, then we're actually able to release a website where we give people the kind of advice, tips, that people could do when they're at home in terms of physical activity, but also mental health wise as well. We kind of give a lot of kind of updates on that side of things. And then in terms of staff wise and how we're going to actually plan the service moving forward, was a lot of work kind of taken in place into that. In terms of this April to kind of May period, we developed a number of kind of initiatives during this period of time once we kind of got into the ways of the working and the likes, and we started to kind of really work in different service areas, developing kind of partnerships to try and make sure all our online and printed resources that we had developed were getting out to the local populations as well around Leeds, working with housing, neighbourhood networks, local care partnerships, etc. Just to kind of get people understanding that we do have online, but also paper kind of printed resources that people could be following during this period of time. And then in terms of the digital side of things, that grew from kind of couch to 5K kind of principles and pop-up Pilates classes and all sorts of different things to try and get different messages out, but also target different groups of the leads as well. So, for example, the Pilates was very much geared around Asian women and trying to encourage them during this period of time as well. Also, in terms of obviously support side of things with the clubs, we kind of made sure from that side of things that we were able to work with those and work with central resources to kind of make sure they didn't fold during this period of time, and we're accessing kind of funding to keep them going during the COVID period and lockdown especially. And then staffing wise, we kind of worked with different services across the council to make sure where we had staff resources that could be redeployed because they couldn't necessarily work from home, then we kind of work with different services from adult social care to schools to parks to anyone that needed that extra support. So in all, we probably sent about 90 full-time equivalents to kind of different areas during this period of time as well. And then we also made sure from our side of things that we were contacting customers, but not only those customers that might need a bit more extra support, but especially the vulnerable people. And we completed about 27,000 calls during this period to our vulnerable members who we class as our kind of Leeds card extras side of things. And that was just more from just a communication point of view and just keeping in touch with people, which a lot of those kind of people did kind of recognize. And actually we were still actually phoning them on a weekly basis during this period as well, to keep in touch with certain people who requested that as well. Going into May, June, when things started to release a little bit in terms of what we could do, it kind of shows in terms of tennis courts bookings where people were able to actually exercise out in the park areas, which is really ideal for during this period of time. The weather is quite good during this period as well, and you can see from the tennis court bookings they dramatically increased over this year. So it's been really positive from that side of things and something that will kind of continue as well. The leisure centres are being used for different reasons as well from during this period of time, so they won't necessarily just close down as such, but whether that was COVID testing, where it's travellers organisations that we were working with, or even in terms of storage and the likes, then working with PPE, for example, then the buildings were getting used during this period of time as well. We developed a number, again, in terms of booklets and stuff and through working with public health as well in terms of those resources to make sure people who needed it most were kind of getting access to this as well. And then one of the biggest things we've probably done is actually our live streaming service that we've kind of set up. I probably would show you the app, but it's probably a bit too more technical in terms of that process, so I won't endanger the internet during this period of time. But anyone who has downloaded the app, the Leeds Active app, can kind of get access to live streaming kind of classes that we're doing. And early days, we're kind of getting 150 people to each class. Even people from views from London to Helsinki to Amsterdam, we were getting them all over the place as well. And we were getting other local authorities trying to contact us to how we've been able to kind of move to this quite quickly as well during this period of time. We also kind of made sure we're keeping in contact with customers and making sure they've got everything they needed. And was there anything else we could work on during this period of time as well to help them progress and keep active as well. And then examples such as table tennis kits and stuff that we were able to kind of get out once the team were a bit more mobile during this period as well. Going into the summer periods, we started to actually really work on in terms of remobilisation the service. So we made it sure from a staffing point of view, all the training was done. We made sure we were working with different partners and co-producing a number of things, which has gone down really well. And we've learned a lot during this period of time to how we can do the things better, and using digital and in face-to-face kind of stuff has been really useful as well. We continue to do our first aid training, life-saving training, and got that back up and running because obviously we needed to make sure staff were trained and ready to go once we kind of got the go ahead to do that. And one of the biggest things that we've kind of done as well is in terms of some toolkits that we delivered, over 3,000 during this period of time, which is toolkits which enable families to kind of use what they got at home to be able to keep active during this period of time. And the team works hard in developing those resources to be able to do that, and working with different organisations, we are able to kind of get those kind of toolkits distributed as well. Once we got the go-ahead from the government, which is, I believe we could open the leisure centres on the 25th of July, we were able to open a small selection of sites straight away. So from the 27th of July onwards, we were able to open kind of 5 sites during this period of time to kind of allow us to kind of start testing stuff. Obviously, we put in a number of procedures and the likes to kind of make sure people are safe. We're testing those all the way through to make sure as well, and we had really positive things. It was pretty much starting again from the leisure centre side of things, so it did take a bit more time to kind of get things moving as quickly as we could, and then we kind of supported other organisations to understand the guidance as well from the government and made sure from their point of view they were COVID secure as well. So that was important from a third sector kind of partnership that we kind of linked in from that side of things as well. And then later in August, we kind of opened further kind of sites as we develop them. Just show a few of the kind of customer feedback side of things that we've kind of had over this time, but it's all been very complimentary. Obviously, with the restrictions we put in place, such as making sure people booked in advance and the likes, then obviously there were additional barriers coming into the sites as well. So we were conscious of that. But obviously from the feedback we've had is extremely good, and people have valued it. And obviously the biggest thing we kind of get is for their own mental health. The skill activity is really important for them during this period of time, especially when they couldn't socialise with others. September, October, we're starting to build things back up again, and as you can see, we opened up more sites, so we're pretty much there or thereabouts with most sites now and offering the full program as we kind of developed this during this time. We also reintroduced our health and fitness membership direct debits because we held off that for a period of time just to kind of encourage people to come back to us, but we lowered that membership from £24.95 to £16.95 in recognition of our capacities and the restrictions we had to put in place during this period of time. But we were able to still maintain kind of 15,500 members during this period of time to pay, and then the remaining kind of 4.5k we kind of still kind of frozen during this time because we didn't make anyone have to pay if they didn't want to come back to us yet, and that's part of our retention strategy, keeping people as well. We started to see swim lessons resume as well for children, and our kind of normal kind of activities, and kind of restarting our longer term kind of health programs team as well in terms of doing the more serious kind of work that we do as well. So we're starting to kind of build that back up during this period of time, and there was a number of campaigns that we delivered during this period just to kind of help us through that as well. October to November, we started gymnastics again as well, so that's pretty much all our program bar kind of school swimming that we kind of restarted. And then we did actually move on to school swimming a bit later on. And then also we got the message that leisure centres and everything else was going to close from the 5th of November. This lockdown has been slightly different in terms of what we've been able to do. So most sites have been remained open in some format, where that's been supporting the adult social care day services that we got running out of 10 of 8 of our sites. Whereas that's elite sport at John Charles, for example, or whether that's kind of school kind of programs that we deliver in the leisure centres as well. And we're able to do school swimming during this period of time, which we started this week as well. So it is slightly differently through that period. Obviously, yesterday we got the news that leisure centres can open back up again. So again, we're kind of looking at all the guidance and making sure from our side of things we're ready to go on the 2nd of December, along with further kind of digital stuff as we develop as well. It's probably fair to say that the pandemic has affected us in terms of physical activities, and I've got a report coming at the next scrutiny board where we'll kind of go through that kind of in activity levels and lights and give a bit more feedback on that side of things as we go through. But it's probably fair to say physical activities has been highlighted more than ever before during this time, so that is good. But obviously there's certain sections of the population where we know have been affected more by this, or not having the resources to be able to do physical activities. So moving forward, the opportunities really are there to kind of use physical activity, and along with mental health kind of opportunities as well, to kind of make sure we kind of put everything back in as part of the recovery, and that's the economic recovery as well. Things such as kind of linking up with we know that obviously people who are fitter and healthier are better immune systems and kind of not affected by the pandemic as much. So in terms of these vaccines, they should be kind of making sure we're getting the messages across around physical activities and the opportunities that exist as well. But also working with employers and making sure that we give people the resources. I know in Active Leeds, we're trying to encourage when people are working at home, they get out and about during daylight hours to kind of do a bit of a walk to make sure they're not just sat behind the PCs all the time. And those are the type of things that we kind of need to get across, and how we can help during this period of time. And then obviously further kind of digital side of things. So apologies, that's been a bit of a whistle stop tour of all the stuff that we've kind of gone through, but hopefully you have kind of read the kind of documents. So I'll pass it over to any questions during this time before passing it over to Jill.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Steve. Yeah, indeed, you've covered a great deal of ground, but in order to keep this as 2 bite-sized chunks, I don't know if any board members have got any questions. In the absence of any indications, could I just say one of the unfortunate characteristics of many that's typified the pandemic period has been the increasing lack of trust, and also the confusion caused by mixed messages and the interplay of those two. And obviously, during the period when our leisure activities reopened, we were beginning to build up more patronage. There was still quite a shortfall in comparison to pre-COVID levels, but presumably now we've got to reset and restart. And I'm just wondering how we're communicating to people precisely what to expect when they visit their local leisure centre or leisure activity, to ensure that they've got confidence that they are being protected in the maximum way possible. And my other question is about staff welfare and staff protection, because obviously those who provide a front-facing service are perhaps more vulnerable in terms of COVID. And I just wonder if you could walk us through what steps have been taken to protect staff.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. In terms of the kind of making sure customers are aware of what kind of to expect, because obviously there were a number of things, such as we had to check in everybody when they got to the buildings, we had to walk through people to their activity and lights. So what we developed was kind of videos of what was to expected from a customer's point of view, and try and encourage them. And then we developed in terms of, once people understood what the restrictions were and how to get through the leisure centres, then we kind of encouraged customers to kind of feedback on what they did. So again, we showed videos across social media and the lights and the website, just to highlight, you know, how easy it is and how comfortable people do feel. And obviously you saw some of the kind of customer feedback we've had during that period of time. So we used that to kind of showcase the kind of leisure centres and how safe people felt. It's probably fair to say, well, once we kind of went back to lockdown this month, people were saying that they felt safer in our environments than going to the supermarkets or going to areas as well. So that we found that really positive from everything we put in place. I mean, to be honest, it was a lot of work to kind of put everything in place, and the whole team is kind of geared together and made that happen across the piece to make activities as safe as possible. But obviously there's still that nervousness around it, especially if certain age groups, more so in any one that is a bit more vulnerable. Then again, that's why we can develop sort of outdoor kind of activities more so than some of the indoor stuff as well, because people felt more safe doing it outdoor than indoor. But obviously, as we get to this winter period, that's harder to do. So yeah, there's a number of things we kind of did from that side of things. Staff welfare again, and Natalie might be able to say a bit more, but we kind of developed our own training platform to make sure staff knew what to expect. Likewise with the customers, when they're coming back to the facilities, we kind of did a kind of training element for them, so they knew before they came back into the facilities that what to expect as well and what was required of those. No one was forced necessarily to do anything, and obviously everyone had to be comfortable. So in terms of PPE equipment and lights, we kind of gave staff the kind of access to whatever they felt comfortable with doing during this period of time. We have started enforcing before the lockdown in terms of face coverings for everyone, which through government kind of advice, it wasn't there originally, but obviously over time we felt it more needed during this period of time, especially as we got more people coming in who weren't doing activities, but for the likes of swim lesson parents, for example, waiting to watch their children. Again, face coverings and lights were required during that period, but staff in welfare, we've been checking in with them constantly as well, just to make sure everyone is feeling comfortable with it. And staff have been welcome coming back into the sites. I don't think they want to go down back out at home again. So it's all been very good from that front.
Okay, Natalie, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think as Steve alluded to previously, we literally have had to rewrite the whole business model for leisure, and I think probably what's worked really well is the staff engagement in that. So we've had staff really leading at the forefront of the mobilisation, which means that they have had a very active role in remobilising and remodelling work instructions and sort of what that looks like. So I think that has enabled us to have that sort of positive front-facing, probably to alleviate some of the reservations people had initially about returning to work.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Denise, you wanted to come in.
Firstly, I just wanted to say to Stephen and all the team, thank you very much, because you've done a tremendous job in stepping up to the plate and providing our communities with that redeployment of working in those hubs and doing redeployment work in various guises. So a big thank you to yourselves and all the team for that. Secondly, to get to the crux of the report, it has been a good report, and it is a good sense of looking at developing the technology side of things and getting people involved in their own living rooms and in their own gardens, rather than having to travel to various places, because we haven't got a leisure centre at every end of everybody's street. But what I am concerned about is the inequalities that are in our city, that people don't have that digital inclusion, and how are we planning to get involved with those people in the technological side of things, because they are the ones that most probably need the interactive activity for their health reasons and for their mental health reasons.
Yes, thanks for that, Denise. One more area where digital exclusion / inclusion is raising its head. Steve.
Thanks, Councillor Reagan. Yeah, totally agree. You know, we were conscious ourselves in terms of that side of things, in terms of obviously how we were going to get just the digital side of things, and obviously that inequality is that not everyone has that kind of capabilities or the likes as well. So we were very conscious of that. It's probably fair to say that we actually had, when we were looking at the data in terms of who was accessing our videos and everything else, it's probably fair to say that there's a much higher kind of older age kind of than we were expecting. So it's probably good that they obviously are a bit more savvy in terms of digital side of things. And obviously through this period, it was probably in an early way to get kind of communicate with your families and lights as well. So that's probably helped us on that front. But obviously in terms of some of the equality stuff, then again, that's where the development team have really stepped up to the mark. And whenever they could get out, they were getting out and passing on these kind of physical resources as well. I'll probably pass you over to Katie, who'll be able to kind of give you a bit more information in terms of that side of things, in terms of how the team did try and get out into the 1% areas and those areas where we kind of knew that there would be lack of resources to be able to do it. So Katie, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there were some examples where the team have still managed to be out in communities to help deliver some of the physical resources, particularly thinking about digital exclusion, which obviously maps in terms of some of the inequalities in the city. We've also worked with colleagues in public health to develop the Healthy at Home booklet that Steve mentioned earlier. I think we're now up to 14,000 prints of that, of which so far 12,000 have been distributed, and we still have a couple of thousand in reserve because we're still getting continual requests. We're trying to connect those with partners who are working with more vulnerable residents in the city to sort of give that with a bit of an encouraging message as well at the start of that. So for example, sometimes they've been connected to food parcel provision and other support networks. The other bit I was just going to mention is we have just secured some funding through Sport England as part of a national pilot to try and see how we can innovate a little bit around this type of resource. So we're going to be working with people who were shielding, working through colleagues in public health around neighbourhood networks and so on, to try and engage people a little bit further around those physical resources to see what might help somebody be active in their home and what might help them feel a bit more confident to come out of their home at the right moment when they're ready. Because one of the things around people's anxieties since COVID and concerns if they're vulnerable about leaving home is obviously significant, and we think physical activity will be able to support that from a physical and mental wellbeing point of view. So within the resource, we're connecting with the 100% digital team to see how we can invite people to be part of either support to use a device they may have or potentially the tablet lending scheme. Just thought perhaps they're worth mentioning as a couple of things we've just started working on.
Okay, thanks for that. Denise, do you want to come back?
Yeah, can I come back? I think one of the groups that you've missed out there, and possibly not intentionally, but how are we working with vulnerable adults and you know, young people that have got disabilities and special educational needs, because that's a real passion for me. And a lot of our young people that are at college age have not been able to return to college for whatever reason, and they're still stuck in their homes, and now with these greater restrictions have been classed as CEV, so that again restraint. So how are you working with them to open up their opportunities?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that perhaps we could pick up a bit further and do some additional work on. Some of the provisions that have been done would be suitable for someone, for example, with a learning or a physical disability, but there are probably further areas there that we could investigate. There's probably the digital challenge comes in there as well, and that's quite tricky. So we would also need to look at how we make sure we've got the right partners engaged in terms of how we reach the right people. And that is part of the challenge with developing resources. They can be as good as they might be, but it's actually getting them to the right people through the right method, I suppose.
Okay,
and
thanks
thank you,
for that.
Councillor Reagan.
Thanks very much.
Sorry, Steve, did you want to say something?
Yeah, sorry, I just didn't thank you for your kind comments as well, Councillor Reagan, around the team's work. So thank you very much.
Okay, cheers. Sandy, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, hello, Steve and Natalie. Seem to be meeting with you a lot recently. Can I just ask about the broader impact on your budgets, of course, because leisure centres closed, memberships got suspended, there were no walk-ins, etc. There was very little, if any, income coming in, yet all the costs are still going out, of course. are there plans? How does one make up? Have you had any government grants or anything to help bridge that budget deficit that you're clearly going to have? Or are we all of this tied up in the 118 million that the council has to find in savings next year? Because obviously there are a number of active Leeds recommendations that will have significant impacts across the city if that's the case. Secondly, I wanted to just quickly ask around membership, really, and this is an anecdotal really, and I'll declare it's my brother-in-law, although I didn't deal with the casework that come from it. He had a 12-month membership and wrote to Active Leeds on the 10th of July. I've just checked the email chain, saying that he wanted to cancel his membership. We wouldn't let him. We never, and I paraphrase, of course, we never contacted him again until the 23rd of October, when we contacted him threatening a debt recovery company that would be in touch to take the money. I got a different councillor, the councillor for his ward, because he doesn't live in my ward, to deal with it, and it's all good as far as that's concerned. But what do we think happened there? Because you said that you've had lots of contact and communication, but clearly not with my brother-in-law. So they're my two questions, really, around the wider budget and around actual individual.
Yeah.
Steve.
Thank you, Councillor. And hello again. Yeah, in terms of the budget side of things, obviously impacted us. I mean, we kind of lost in the region of kind of 1.2 million per month in terms of the activity during we were kind of locked down. Obviously, we put in a number of measures to try and recoup some of that kind of cost elements that, as you say, is still going out the door. So obviously in terms of savings side of things, we turned all the kind of pool plant equipment down, and the lights. Energy usage was kind of low during this period of time as well, just to kind of safeguard us on that front. So we try to cut back as much as we possibly can in terms of that, but obviously a large portion of our kind of cost is staffing, so obviously that remain during this period of time. But yeah, it's probably fair to say it will take us a bit of time to kind of build that back up, and the team are kind of working away. We probably did start to see a bit of recovery back in October, and in terms of new people coming through into the system as well as the kind of customers side of things, then we did kind of see that element in there. In terms of leisure centres wise, there is a bit of support from the government on that front. So every 75 pence in the pound we were able to kind of recoup back for this year, in terms of our lost kind of network, and obviously that goes into the council's overall kind of budget side of things, and obviously there's still pressures there, so we still are a pressure to, obviously as part of that, the savings proposals moving forward, but we obviously need to work on the way at trying to encourage and get back to where we were pre-COVID as much as we possibly can, as quickly as we can. But we need to do that in a kind of, probably, to be honest, we probably didn't foresee this kind of next lockdown coming so soon. So obviously from that side of things, it's another challenge in there to try and then recoup again and go again in that side of things as well. So yeah, there's going to be further kind of pressures on us, but we're pretty confident with the opportunities that exist, and the better working in terms of the health side of things and working with different partners, and as kind of Katie and Jill will outline shortly as well, there are other avenues to make sure we kind of recoup those kind of income pressures as much as we possibly can during this period of time. We'll be working away at trying to do that as quickly as we can during the next kind of couple of months and into next year. It's going to be a vital one for us. In terms of the membership side of things and communication,
just before Steve moves on to the second part of that, probably just to confirm for Councillor Lay that the overall position in Active Leeds is being caught up within the position across the directorate, where we have at period 6 a £20 million, or just shy of £20 million underspend. And as Councillor Lay sort of indicated, that is caught up in the overall 118.8 million. So it's all being dealt with in the round. As Steve says, the government's income compensation scheme will provide some funding to us, but that will go to the organisation, to the council as a whole, because obviously the council as a whole is holding the lost income. And probably just to say that there is a 5% de minimis in relation to that. So the 75p in a pound is actually slightly less than 75p in a pound, because the council has to subsume the first 5% of losses from the income compensation scheme to start with. Steve, I'm sure we'll be able to do.
Thanks for that interjection, Phil. Steve, back to you.
In terms of the membership stuff, yeah, I am quite surprised. I mean, to be honest, we've had obviously in terms of the membership side of things, we've got 24,000 people kind of taking out memberships for ourselves. Then we've also got all our children's swim lessons, all our tennis programs, all our gymnastics programs, and the likes. So there is a lot of people to kind of contact. It's probably fair to say that some of the communication wise, we try to get out across the board, whether that's through our app, whether that's through social media, whether that's through letters to individuals, and emails and likes as well. So I'm surprised that any have not gone out, but obviously we are aware that there's one or two who, because if they have received an email, it might have gone into their junk mail and the likes. So we've worked through that number of things, but also in terms of how up to date some people's contact details are as well, has been a bit of an issue in terms of people might have moved homes or changed their email address or the likes as well. So we've just been wary of that, but I can definitely look into that individual case and just see.
No, it's fine. It's sorted. I just needed to know it wasn't widespread, really.
Yeah, it's obviously we didn't want to miss anyone as much as possible, but we did try and encourage it. But to be fair, we've not really received that many inquiries about people having issues with their not receiving communication. If anything, we've actually had a positive in terms of people have really appreciated the communication, how kept up to date people were with stuff as well. But yeah, it's probably fair to say there's a few that obviously in terms of getting to people during this period of time has proved difficult, but that's something for us to learn for next time as well. Well, hopefully there isn't the next time. But
can I just ask a follow-up?
Sandy, you want to come back?
Yeah, just very quickly. I don't quite understand, how does the app work? Because you talk about having people from London and people from Amsterdam. If I wanted to do yoga, I don't, but if I did in pre-COVID days, I'd have to go to the leisure centre. You'd charge me, I assume, and you get an income. I get a face-to-face yoga system. I assume that's not the case on the app. Then you're giving away free yoga lessons, are you? So there's so that again is part of my tied up into that sort of question of you're giving a service, even if it's outside or on an app digitally, but there's no income coming.
Yeah, it's probably fair to say during the kind of lockdown period, we used this as an example just to try and hold on to people and give them resources so we didn't lose them. It's probably fair to say that, you know, we've on our kind of numbers, we probably lost about 8% of customers during this period of time. When you look at other private providers and likes, you're kind of talking on 50 to 40% kind of people have lost members. So we've worked really hard in terms of that side of things to give people the tools to still keep active and still being engaged with us. And that was probably the kind of reason that we didn't originally kind of, you look at the cost being passed over to kind of customers for that resource. Obviously now the sites are coming back open, lights, that is an additional kind of service. So now we will be looking to kind of either offer that just for members and then be included as part of their membership, or people can pay and charge into it. We're just working with the app developers in terms of that payment mechanism to kind of how it all works. But hopefully by the end of the year, we'll actually have that as a paying kind of membership as well. If people don't want to come into the sites, but they still want to access that service, then we will be looking to charge people for that side of things to bring in that income. The app, yeah, it is open to anyone at the minute, because again, that's just a way of us encouraging people to get in touch with us and keeping contact with us. But we'll be able to lock down certain parts of it moving forward.
All very altruistic, but you need an income.
Yeah, definitely. It's an important part. Like I said before, people were looking to us at how we've done it and like, so we're having discussions now in terms of that side of things, and even wherever we can work up, because like I say, if people in London want to pay for the service as well, that's all the bonus as well for us.
Okay, thanks for that. Karen.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to know if there's been any extra publicity done and advertising, and which groups do you engage with within the communities? Because as a member of Housing Robin Hood, I don't see much activity or engagement with our adults of any groups. So I'm just wondering if you've been doing any advertising, especially during the lockdown period, to inform people on charges, services, anything. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Karen. I'm going to take that as the last question on this particular section, then I'm going to move over to Jill for her presentation. So, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, as part of our kind of normal kind of mechanisms in terms of marketing and communication wise, then yeah, we have been going out there. We probably haven't been going out there as much as what we normally would do, just because obviously capacity wise and the likes, we're initially kind of aware that even just meeting all our normal kind of members, we didn't want to overskill things. And obviously in terms of not all sites being open as well, we couldn't necessarily go out there full hog in terms of all our communications wise, especially in terms of the leisure centre side of things. But we do go out there with messaging, but obviously we can always do more in terms of that front. We use more kind of digital side of things than ever before, but there's still that need for radio and different things that we're doing. I know a member of the team is speaking to the radio today just to kind of encourage that. But the more we can do, the more we can get out there into the local communities as well, then the better. So if there are specific groups, again, welcome to kind of pass those over to us so we can encourage it as much as possible. But we do a fair amount in terms of comms wise and the likes, but like I said, there's still more we need to do in terms of reaching people and different messaging. How we message is important, probably more than how much we do. So again, we're kind of working on that front into the new year campaign and the likes, just to encourage people to come back into exercise or start exercise during this period of times, and how good from a mental health point of view that is, that we're kind of reaching. But we do work obviously with a number of providers and third sector organisations and that side of things to try and help us get the messages out, but there's always more we can do in that front as well.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Karen, do you want to come back? And then I will bring you in, Mohammed, and then we'll move on to Jill's presentation.
I was just going to ask if it would be possible for Steve to send some information out, probably just to me, because obviously I'm not usually on this scrutiny board, and a lot of that is sort of news to me. So I'm sort of thinking, how many people in the wider community don't know anything about it?
Yeah,
so
no,
that would be helpful.
I'm sure your question, Karen, is as relevant to all of us as ward members as it is to Ardsley and Robin Hood. So if we could get that information out via Angela, Steve.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, Mohammed, and then we will move on to Jill.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I lost the connection in the middle of the questions, but just on Councillor Renshaw's question, I think this it's a very valid question and probably best covered in the next item as well, because some of the work Jill and Katie do in terms of the development and the physical activity and ambition, the update, which will be the second part of Steve's presentation. But there is an app, Active Leeds app, which anybody, and we, through members, we would, if we could include that in the report, and maybe we could write to all the members to share that, so anybody could actually download the app, and through the app, you don't have to be a member. You can actually access, until we decide otherwise about charging. You can access the online stuff. There's a lot of what goes on, the classes and what each centre offers. There is actually a lot out there. I'd just like to say that, Chair, before we move on in terms of our centres, that a lot of work has actually gone in terms of reopening the centres, and then we've obviously had this second lockdown, and then obviously we'll have to do that again. I think we haven't wasted any time in terms of not engaging with our members, and that was quite clear when around 70% of our members are actually come back as soon as we open, despite some difficult circumstances, and people have been slightly nervous as well about coming back. So when the pandemic came in, like Steve said in the presentation, our activity levels and membership levels in our centres were increasing, whereas the inactivity levels are decreasing. But we'll have to start again, and I think this is probably an opportune time, given what's been said nationally as well, and what people have been doing walking, that we need to kind of engage with as many people as possible. So anybody you need to forward in that direction, and we're happy to talk to.
Okay, thanks very much, Mohammed. And I think that segues wonderfully into finally Jill's presentation. Jill, the floor is yours, or at least the screen.
I've just shared my screen. Can you see the presentation?
I can.
Lovely.
I'm assuming everyone else can.
Yes.
Okay, go on, Jill.
Lovely. So I just wanted the opportunity really to come and talk to you all around the physical activity ambition work. We talked to the board previously about this kind of area of work, and it's just to spend just 10 minutes or so updating you on where we are. And just to start with, although we're presenting today as Active Leeds, this really is a strong cross-service piece of work. We're working really closely with our public health colleagues on this, and equally health partnerships. So a really good, strong piece of cross-service working. So I think when we came to talk to you first time, we talked very much about that evidence base about physical activity. And Steve's already picked it up in his presentation earlier. But that idea about physical activity being that kind of miracle cure, and the evidence base, both in terms of physical and mental health, and how much impact being active can have on some of those long-term conditions, such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and equally around anxiety and depression. So it's a real biggie in terms of that whole kind of prevention agenda, and that idea of health and well-being kind of city. So in terms of, just to give you a little bit of context, Sport England is a government quango, and it leads the work around physical activity currently. And it does an annual survey, Active Lives, which you can see there illustrates the percentage of the population, 16+ adult population in England, that are inactive. And that means that they are doing less than 30 minutes of physical activity a week. In terms of optimum level health benefits, it's that kind of magic number of 150 minutes of physical activity a week in terms of people's health to really maximise. So a lot of our data and a lot of that national kind of context comes from Sport England. And I really wanted to share this next slide with you all, because this is really at the heart of our work and the way that we are trying to work. And that's in terms of the whole inequalities agenda. And that's a really good kind of slide there that shows that in terms of age, as people age, they are less active. Men are more active than women. If you have a disability and a long-term health condition, then you are going to be less active. Those in lower socioeconomic groups are less active, and equally there are differences in activity levels based on ethnic background. So again, highlights very much what's been talked about earlier today, that those inequalities, and particularly those health inequalities, are a massive driver in terms of this work, and how we're approaching this work. And just to give that a little bit of context, again, this information was shared at previous scrutiny boards. There are almost 240,000 adults in the city that do not do enough physical activity for health. So they are doing less than that 30 minutes of physical activity per week. And as you might expect, that kind of maps across to some of our priority neighbourhoods and some of those inequalities that were reflected in that first slide. My School, My Health survey showed that approximately 50% of Leeds children, young people, only do the recommended 1 hour physical activity a day. And there are over 60% of our adults are classified as overweight and obese. So a number of kind of long-term kind of physical activity issues there that is part of this work and what we're keen to start addressing. So when we came to talk to you, we talked about this idea of a physical activity ambition for the city, and that idea about everybody active every day, that whole idea about moving more and building physical activity into everyday life. And for us, it's what does that look like and feel like? What does Leeds as an active place look and feel like? And that's part of our work now, in kind of that kind of shared vision and understanding around what Leeds could potentially look like. And we know that a better connected city that prioritises physical activity across networks will make it easier for that physical activity to be part of everyday life and part of the normal day for us all. So we set out to do some physical activity conversations, and those were citywide conversations. And again, around that building of an understanding, building that shared kind of vision about what an active Leeds might look and feel like, and how do we go about kind of developing a city that moves more. So we asked 3 key questions. And that was, what does physical activity mean to you? What gets in the way of you being active? And is there anything that would help overcome what gets in the way of being active? These questions were worked out alongside Leeds Beckett, so they're our academic partner in this piece of work. And we went out to about 4,000 individuals, and that was an online survey and focus groups to discuss these questions and get feedback on those. So you might have all seen, and I know not only have we been to the board to talk through Get Set Leeds, but out to community committees about that whole kind of getting people to engage in the conversation. So we're now at a stage where those conversations have been had, and we've worked with Leeds Beckett and they've analysed the data for us, and hopefully we shared the link to a kind of the animation. And that shares the key findings in that report, and hopefully puts it across really quite simply what the kind of analysts of those conversations were. So far, the animation has gone to the Health and Wellbeing Board. It's gone to our Physical Activity Steering Group, which I'll come on to talk about a bit later in the presentation, and gone through some internal comms. But we're currently working up a whole comms plan, how we distribute that animation and how we kickstart further conversations around that whole idea of making Leeds an active city. So just very briefly, we talked about Leeds Beckett's been involved in this work, and they've taken all the kind of data, if you like, from the conversations, and they're working with us in terms of a behaviour change model. And Leeds Beckett's behaviour change model is called the influencer framework. But the key bits of this really are those kind of bits that are shown in the diagram there. The idea that it's looking at it on an individual basis, a social basis, and an environment basis. And it's all about the want, the motivation to be physical activity, but equally the capability. Can I be physically active? And when we talk about the social side, we're talking about all those things that it's about your friends, it's about your family, it's about what you see on social media, it's about those kind of influences of, in terms of being physically active, whereas the environment, as you might expect, can be everything from the built environment, the pollution levels, connections to cycling and walking, what communication, do I know what's available in my locality? So that's the behaviour change model, and that's what we're using to help shape how we develop that physical activity ambition. And hopefully from the animation, you would have got the real key kind of messages from that analysis of those conversations. And the real message is that people want to be physically active. So the motivation is there for people to be physically active. What gets in the way or makes it difficult is the environment and those social kind of drivers. And this slide says exactly the same, that people want to be physically active, and that didn't matter. That came across different genders, ethnicity, disability, long-term conditions, different postcode areas. The want to be physically active is there. It is those kind of social and environmental drivers that are stopping people from being more active. And the video showed you again some examples of what gets in the way, and there's a few more there on the kind of presentation. Again, it's around kind of my family is supportive. It could be that I need to access public transport to get to the class that I really want to do. Actually, if I feel safe going into my park and my green spaces, I'm much more likely to use it. And again, I'm not going to dwell on this. It's another one that just shows for our work now, we need to focus on, we know people want to be physically active, but it's how we help people to be more capable to be physically active. And what research is telling us that there could be very small changes in a person's life. For example, oh, I've just noticed there's a walking group in my area. Do you know what? I think I'll join that. But makes that big changes in how active they might be. So we need to work really hard on understanding that better and looking at those environmental and social factors to help people to become more active. So where are we now? So at the moment, in terms of the physical activity ambition, we're starting to build an action plan and work programs based around the research and insight. And we are really keen that we do that with the people who live and work in Leeds. And really fundamental to our approach, and we've worked really hard across service on that, is that whole kind of idea of co-production and how we work with people to develop the kind of action plans and what we focus on going forward, and how we, working with people, can make Leeds an active city. And so we have a framework in place, and that's based on the World Health Organization's physical activity framework, and that splits down that kind of idea of an active society. I see people like me being physically active, active environments. I'm surrounded by those things that make it easier for me to be active. Active people. In Leeds, I feel able to be active every day. It goes back to that whole kind of thing around capability and that real wider active system. So again, goes back to that point we were talking about earlier about that whole connectivity around physical activity, and how in terms of our plans, strategies, our policies, how we work together to embed physical activity. So this isn't, we haven't got this far yet at all, but it was just to kind of give an illustration of kind of that plan on the page idea where we want to get to in terms of this piece of work. Again, it goes through those 4 key domains: active people, active societies, active environments, and active systems. So something around the active people bit might be, we need to really consider our offer for people with disabilities and long-term conditions and what we might need to change for that. It may be something around our approach in schools and that idea of really embedding active schools across Leeds, that we are really changing behaviour with our young people, or getting back patterns of behaviour with our young people from a really early age. Active societies, it's quite likely here we'll look around that whole kind of buzz around being active and physical activity. It's around those kind of long-term messages and campaigns. And equally that kind of bit around creating community champions, those people that are like me in my locality that I can relate to and that I can kind of I feel comfortable with. And I think when we talked earlier about the inequalities, that kind of community champion in our localities or with some of those underrepresented groups is a real kind of biggie for us to drive some of this work forward. Active environments, we've already talked a lot about that. Improving walking, cycling infrastructure. If there has been some learning from COVID, and there's lots of learning from COVID, but that whole access to green spaces and people being outside and nature and all that kind of side is massive, and something in terms of how we encourage people to move more, to be active in those kind of spaces that have those kind of health and well-being elements. And lastly, as we talked about before, the active systems, that connection, collaboration, links across those different kind of partners in the city, across our strategies and policies, to really embed this work as part of what we do. So we're not there yet with this. We are working on it, as I say, an action plan and work programs alongside that. And we are really keen to do that with people right across all levels to kind of develop that action plan going forward. And the last bit I really wanted to share with you was some work we are doing around the governance of physical activity. And this has been a key piece of our work as well. And we have in place the Physical Activity Design Group, which is a posh word really for the kind of operational group. So that's where the kind of work programs are looked at. That's where officers come back to kind of update on and look at progression and all that kind of side there. We have now established a physical activity steering group, and that's across. So we have external partners on there. So for example, Yorkshire Sport Foundation, Sport England and Health Watch sit there, as well as cross-service areas. So public health sit there with us, economic development sit there, health partnerships. And we're currently in the process of establishing the Physical Activity Partnership Board, which we feel it will be an independent partnership board. And Councillor Charwood has really we're really pleased has agreed to chair that board. We're currently going through the process of looking to recruit 5 or 6 new initial members to the board, with a first meeting hopefully January 2021. Leaving their scope for other members to be recruited once the board kind of feels where the gaps are. But for us, that Physical Activity Partnership Board is really key in that whole kind of strategic leadership about this agenda, about influencing, about those connections across the different areas, and that whole kind of passion about physical activity. We've just tried to illustrate there that the board will be independent, but it will absolutely have really strong relationships with some of those key kind of other existing boards or other work areas. And I think at the moment we're really linked well into that health and wellbeing agenda and the work that we are doing there. But equally, it needs to be across inclusive growth, climate emergency, the work around the anchor organisations. So that just gives you a feel of the kind of governance we're looking at. Underneath that sits those work streams I just talked through. And then we've got enablers, so those sorts of things that will support that work, those work streams. And as we've talked already, communications and marketing, key, digital, workforce, continued funding for this area, that opportunity for research and evaluation. So we're evaluating what we do, that we're having an impact, that we are making the changes we think. And the last bit on there is really, again, around that whole idea about co-production and working with people and our communities to develop the kind of physical activity ambition and the approach of this work. I hope all that's made sense. Quite happy to take any questions now.
Okay, thanks, Jill. Denise.
Yeah, hiya, Jill. We've met before at our committee meetings.
We did.
I'm really encouraged by this, but what I want to say is that we've got to build on the work that we're doing in our 6 priority areas and our other 10% areas, because that is the key to raising that awareness around physical activity. Helps with health issues, it helps with employability, it helps with everything. So I'd be really welcome to see how we're focusing in on those particular areas and program. I know that there are some programs of work with going on with cycling and all our refurbished areas, but I think we need to look at access for all our people that are not necessarily the very, very economically challenged in those particular areas. And we've got our BAME people and our other cultures that are not necessarily open to activity. So how do we get them more involved?
Certainly.
Thanks, Denise. Jill.
I totally agree. So there are a number of things. We have some funding, Get Set Leeds Local, being funded through Sport England. That's focusing on 4 of our 1% areas. Our team has we have a localities team, but the focus of their work, absolutely, Denise, is in those 6 1% areas and extends out to the 10% areas. We are all the time trying to, so for example, where we work with British Cycling, focus those resources into that area. I think it's a shame, really. Well, COVID came and we had just got the funding from Sport England, so we absolutely had to change our approach to what we did in those kind of areas. But I think we can absolutely build on that. All the time we are looking at, so for example, we talked about the toolkits earlier, and I know the team worked really hard on producing a toolkit where you didn't need it could go across all languages, so it was done much more around images, and that, so we are working and trying to do a lot in this kind of area, Denise, and it's probably worth at some point, I know we're coming just maybe talking to you through some of what the team is doing, again maybe coming back to the community committees, I don't know, and doing something like that just to update you all on where we're at.
Can I come back on that?
Of course, Denise, yeah.
Yeah, I think that, the last point that you made there, I think that's really key to getting the message out to the communities, is working very closely and connectively with the community committees and looking at our health and wellbeing champions and our other champions about environment and how we process that thing. So yeah, I look forward to that, Jill.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. I think that's a very pertinent point, because unless I missed it, the governance doesn't really make any mention of community committees, and that seemed to be a major omission. No need to come back on that, Jill. John, you got your hand up and then it went down. Do you want to come in?
Sorry, I didn't know why it went down. Yes, I had raised my hand. 2 questions, if I may, Chair. First of all, the figures, which was the start of this presentation, were figures derived from Sport England. And really, I want to ask, how did they define physical activity? Now, clearly, they would have included participation in sports. Although on Radio 4 this morning, there was a discussion about whether snooker was a sport. I have to say there's not much physical activity in most snooker matches I've ever participated in or watched on television. But so what is the definition, particularly of interest? Some lists of physical activity which are good for health include gardening. And there have been a number of public opinion polls over the past few months looking at what people did during lockdown. And there was clearly, from the results of those polls, an increase in gardening. And I noticed one of the cartoons that you showed actually had a picture of a person with a lawnmower. So maybe gardening was included in that survey, but perhaps they ignored that quite important part, which might pertain particularly to older age groups. And the second question is the other end of the age group scale, because yeah, children do spend a lot of time on their tablets and their iPhones. That's okay if that's balanced with doing the sort of reasonable level of exercise. And children spend quite a lot of their time in schools. So to what extent are you involving schools in encouraging children and providing the facilities for them to take part in sports and so on?
Yeah, thank you for that, John. 2 very good questions. How robust are the figures that we get from Sport England, and how do we encourage more activity outside of school for children?
I think both really valid questions. In terms of the Sport England definition, so it's an active life survey. John, I can't remember what exactly is included, but they have totally shifted in terms of that idea of things moving more. So it isn't your snookers and it isn't your darts and things at that kind of end of the scale, but I'm not sure, hand on heart, if it goes to the kind of gardening and that kind of side. I don't think it includes that bit. So I can absolutely and I'll take that down as an action, give you the exact what they include in there. I know they looked at it to reflect more shorter kind of leisure walks and cycling trips and that kind of stuff. So they are adapting to that concept more about moving more, but I don't think it's gone as far as including gardening yet. So
yeah, and I think that's a very important point, because John is right. A lot of people, including myself, owe our sanity, I think, to the amount of time we've been able to spend in the garden over the last 8 or 9 months. And it needs to form part of our local strategy, whether it's encouraging people to garden in their own homes or to get an allotment or whatever. Steve, did you want to come in on this particular point?
Yes, please, Chair. Just to kind of back that up, yeah, gardening isn't included in those kind of figures in terms of that aspect. Obviously, sporting, they're very much in the historical kind of side of things, been focused on sport rather than necessarily physical activity side of things. So, but like Jill says, they are slowly moving towards that. But in terms of the likes of gardening, it has been highlighted to them a number of times in terms of that side and how important that is. And like you say, in terms of lockdown side of things, even more so. So we are still having talks with them. They are reviewing the kind of side of things in terms of their strategy and the likes as well. So we will make that point known across that point as well.
I mean, I suppose the name on the tin is Sport England, not Gardening England. And I think the important caveat that I'm sure the board would want to attach to that is that our local work around asking people and generating and encouraging and supporting and facilitating activity needs to take that on board, irrespective of what Sport England do or say. So Karen, you wanted to come in.
Sorry, what about the school bit of my question? Sorry.
Oh, sorry, John. Yes, the school bit. Jill.
Yeah, so I think, so there is a young people's steering group that, again, cross-service, that looks at how we're embedding physical activity in our schools environments, right to kind of outside of schools as well. I think that goes back to that. We work really closely, so there's an active schools team within our children's services, so there's always conversations going on there, and they have that kind of remit of embedding PE, physical activity and sport. It is a real tricky one, because you know, the more that it's kind of academies and the more we move, that kind of, it has to be a whole school approach. And you know, right from what we encourage at break times, getting kids to walk to school, how that impacts on the family. So it's a whole work area and project in itself. So we are absolutely having those conversations, and that is through a children and young people's city kind of cross-service steering group. But it's a big task, and it's something, you know, that lots of capacity, lots of resources that are needed. I think sometimes that's, you know, where that board might come in, or equally where all of us can champion that or have that influence in sometimes our local areas with our schools and everything else, so that, you know, we have the information or the frameworks to put in place around active schools, but it's equally having those conversations at a locality level to get that school to take that on board.
Yeah, and just finally on that point, although the statistics say that 50% of children are not achieving the hour a day, that doesn't mean 50% aren't having any sort of activity. So I think it would be useful to know what activity the 50% are engaging in and how we might make up that deficit, rather than assuming, because I think all schools generate some sort of physical activity as part of their, you know, part of their curriculum. Right, Karen, you wanted to come in, and then I'll bring you in, Graham.
Thank you, Chair. I just welcome the presentation that Jill's just done, because I think it highlights...
Karen, you're a bit quiet.
It's because I've got that up there. Sorry, Chair.
Right, that's much better.
I was just saying, I welcome the comments that Jill made and the presentation. I think it highlights the intergenerational skills that can be delivered, or the physical activities that are applicable to all. And although John doesn't think that snooker is a physical activity, it depends sort of what ability level you're looking at, because for some people that would be the only physical activity that they could participate in. If it's somebody disabled, they might just use their arms, which snooker is a very skilled sport, in inverted commas. So I think it's something that you've got to really look at across the whole ability range and age levels as well, and try and get them to work together.
Yeah,
thank you, Chair.
Thanks for Karen. One of the things that occurred to me is that although sport, darts and snooker and pool aren't physical activities so much, they are social activities, and there's a mental health dimension that comes into it. So I think it's a bit more sophisticated than just how many calories you burn while you're engaged in these activities. Jill, I don't know if you wanted to respond to that.
No, I think for us it's kind of that moving more. So whatever that moving more is for an individual, and I think that goes back to your earlier point, Councillor Trustwell, about for us the messaging is about moving more. So absolutely, if it means that you walk to the shop to get your shopping or you do the gardening, that is absolutely fine with us. It's that kind of idea of moving more, and whatever that is, whether you're a young person or you're an older person, it's kind of that kind of concept. And I think what Karen's point there is that it absolutely has to be relevant for the individual and their abilities in that too.
Okay, thank you. Right, Graham, I'm going to take you as the last contributor, and then I'm going to move to the next item on the agenda. Graham.
Right, thank you. I suppose it comes as a head of comment really, but one thing that the COVID business has enabled is that my wife and I now walk a great deal more than we ever did before. Now we're not going down to the Civic every day and back and whatnot. We have the time, and the point I want to make is that local walking just around where you live, we have the opportunity to do everything from a half-hour amble to quite a trek just by walking a bit further and going down the next road, walking a bit further, etc. So I think that with a bit of imagination, you can make walking an incidental part of your daily life. I don't say we do it every day, but it's got us walking where we didn't before, and a great deal more people could do that, I'm sure. We do certainly see a lot of the same faces when we are walking within the neighbourhood, but local streets. When you start walking, you realise just what you can do with the geography of the neighbourhood you live in. So I would push that.
Okay, thanks very much, Graham. And of course, when the restrictions aren't quite so tight, there are walking groups. They can enhance that social element with looking at the history of the area they're walking around and all kinds of things like that. So, yeah, Jill, don't feel that you need to give us a rundown on every walking group in this city.
Yeah.
I think it's a point that we can take on board. Right, I'm determined we're going to move on to the next agenda item now. I think we've had a really good discussion prompted by those two excellent presentations that we've received. And thank you very much to Mohammed, Councillor Rafiq, and his officers in bringing that information to us. So thanks very much. And of course, you can now leave us if you so wish.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, bye-bye. That brings on to agenda item 9. Obviously, the Airborough Leisure Centre renovation project, which was brought to us as an item for scrutiny by the 3 Airborough Ward colleagues. We did have the working group last week, and I think virtually the whole board were in attendance at that, so we don't need to cover all the ground that we covered then. Angela's comprehensive note, I think, identifies those areas where there are lessons to be learned, but we've got Phil and Steve here who've already introduced themselves. Phil, Steve, do you want to very briefly comment on our discussions, or can I open it up to members from the outset?
I think I'd agree with you, Chair. It's a comprehensive report. I think we accept that there are some things that we can pick up and learn from. So happy to move directly to any questions or the discussion from members.
Okay, thanks very much, Graham. I'll bring you in at this point.
Right. Well, I suppose this basically is just ward members' opinion of what we did last week and what happened in real life, and the lessons that we think can be learned from this. I would start out by saying that Airborough Leisure Centre isn't just a leisure centre, it's something which means a huge amount to a lot of people in North West Leeds. I made the danger of saying Airborough people last time at the working group, and I was corrected. It is a North West Leeds centre, and it's well loved, and it's still well loved, even though we had to do without it for a heck of a long time. So what did we learn? I think we learnt that communication is one of the most important parts of this sort of job. Communication and management of expectations, because we were given to expect we would have a leisure centre back in a certain length of time, and it didn't happen. And why didn't it happen? Because we didn't know how much asbestos there was in the place. This was something which we talked about within the working group. And when asked why hadn't we looked for more asbestos when we found the first lot, well, we'd have had to shut the place if we found any. We had to shut the place anyway. So it's a question here of streamlining. I think that if there had been a bit more exploration, any possible exploration, then it might just have been that when we thought we were getting to the end of all these renovations, all of a sudden the brakes came on and we had umpteen weeks of closure waiting for the asbestos to be got rid of. What we got at the end is a cracking leisure centre. I mean, it's a wonderful place. It was before, but it's better now. And all we want is the other bits doing now that weren't able to be done before. But I do think we upset a lot of people because, as I say, they thought they were getting it. I mean, we've just been talking about exercise. And what is that place? There's a number of old people who go there for swimming and exercise and whatnot. Absolutely amazing. And they felt totally bereft when this was happening because the nearest one is quite a long way away. So, poor communication, expectations were badly managed. We were given to think we were going to get a lot more sooner than we did. And a very small point, but we spent a huge amount of money. We ended up with a good leisure centre, and before we could open it, we had to drag some local people in to make the garden look right. Nobody thought of putting a few bob on top of the bill to make it look nice outside. Luckily, the nursery in Guiseley offered to come down and rotovate and dig over the beds there, and Guiseley and Bloom came along and did a bit of work, making it look a bit better. If we hadn't had a nursery that would come along and do that, and if we hadn't had a Guiseley and Bloom, I'm not quite sure how that would have happened. We'd have had a lovely leisure centre with the weeds growing up amassed in front of it. That never cropped up at the working group, but it was a point which actually made us locally feel a little bit sore at the time. So I think that's sufficient anyway. But I do say thank you for what we've got now, because I think it is, as I say, I think it's a cracking centre now with a library in it. It's good. A cafe, yeah, just the job. So we're further forward than we were when we started, but we should not have had to keep making excuses to residents. We should have been upfront at the beginning. We should have planned it better. And we should perhaps in future think in terms, a 60s building has asbestos, we know it, so let's find the damn stuff and take it into account at the beginning, not allow it to mess up the whole proceedings. Okay.
Yeah, thanks very much, Graham. And I can add, if I'm being sort of parochial, that my wife has now stopped nagging me about when the Area Leisure Centre is going to reopen. Just before the officers come in, or any other members, I just wanted to share my concerns that emerged from the working group. Obviously, the project was subject to very lengthy delays. However, it strikes me that several of the components, and Graham's touched on this, that caused that delay were foreseeable, and the asbestos was foreseeable. And even given what happened, even if we'd have identified the extent of the presence of asbestos, that would still have injected a sizable delay into the proceedings at the outset, which I don't think, I just wonder, 6 months seems to be an extraordinary period of time to remove asbestos from a building, no matter how large it is. One of the other foreseeable elements that concerned me was the overall state of the property, the overall state of the building, and that roof leaks weren't identified until the work started. That, to my mind, raises a few alarm bells. The tiling in the pool promenade, I think we could put down to being something that was unforeseen, and you would have needed a crystal ball probably to have identified that. The crack in the concrete floor, which led to 13 weeks of delay, was something that was inherent in the design. It was a design fault of those who drew up the specification, and that is a worry that a mistake of that nature could be made. And then the cracks in the pool tank, and we all know from experience elsewhere, for example, John Charles Sports Centre, that you always get issues with pools leaking, and that can be anticipated. So while I subscribe to the wisdom that the officers have put forward, to consolidate projects like this into one tender and have one contractor responsible, I'm not sure that would necessarily have prevented a lot of the delays. And certainly I do accept the point that has been made and the lessons that have been learned in terms of contract management. So having said that, unless there are any other contributions from board members, Phil, Steve, do you want to come back on the comments that Councillor Latty and myself have made?
Chair, and if I come in first and probably just say, obviously I've moved into the role post the Airborough redevelopment. I learned very early on in my career, never try to defend the indefensible, and I think the report sets out that there were a series of failings, and I think the report sets that out in great detail, and there are some lessons to be learned. And I think what we would want to do from the service is reassure you that those lessons brought forward from that report have been acknowledged, and we'll do our utmost in terms of the programming, the intrusive works, the aggregation or disaggregation, and absolutely the issue about expectation management and communication. They're all very, very valid points, and I think as officers we fully accept them. What I would say is I'm involved in other projects across the directorate, and I know that the information that's flowing from the Airborough report is also feeding into our thinking on some of those projects. So projects at the town hall, where we've quite clearly having a set of conversations about the value of intrusive surveys early on in the process, so that we open up and find out what the problems are. So I think the first thing is just to absolutely reassure members that the issues that have been identified are being taken seriously. When you've got a major construction project, you're always going to have unexpected things, and you're never absolutely too sure what's going to crop up, and that's why there are provisional sums and that's why there's contingencies. But I think what we do need to do is reflect upon the fact that actually some time spent early doors does sort of deliver benefits later on. So if I can sort of shape that in terms of his overall sort of response to members, but then let Steve sort of pick up some of any of the detail, because obviously Steve was involved at least in the review work.
Okay, Steve.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, I mean, obviously, like Phil says, we kind of realised some of those learning points as Councillor Latty and yourself, chairs, pointed out in terms of these different elements around asbestos and the kind of early days in terms of the work needs to be done prior to that, but also who kind of removes asbestos and the like as well. So yeah, it's, you know, the report that Angela's done has kind of clearly highlighted some of the things and learning points from our side of things that, as Phil again kind of highlights, is it's not just ourselves that have learned from this, but other kind of projects moving forward with things as well. It's you know, they're not just Active Leeds kind of principles, they're across the board in projects moving forward as well. So there's a lot in terms of that, but probably in terms of some of the points in terms of the crack and the lights as well, it's the specialist kind of areas in terms of having a specialist kind of designer and construction kind of team as well is kind of an important part to make, because obviously swimming pools and pool plant rooms and the lights are very specialist kind of areas that, again, we've kind of learned from that aspect that, you know, we need to get early in terms of the design team and lights is that specialist kind of contractor or designer who understands the buildings and understands some of the pitfalls with previous kind of work as well that they might have found, that such as the pool cracks and the leaks and lights as well. So yeah, it's definitely a lot to be learned from that, and from our side of things, it's kind of helped us shape things moving forward and how we've been able to do things as well. In terms of Councillor Latty's point around the add-on bonuses in terms of the gardening and the lights, then yeah, again, they're kind of the pluses elements that we kind of need to get the building opened and conscious of that, and obviously how important the building is to the local community, but as well. So we probably try to do a little bit too much at times, but we're able to actually do a little bit more in that facility during a period of time, as refurbishing the gym, kind of doing extra works in terms of corridor space and the lights, just to make it a bit more of a rounded project rather than just the swimming pool. Because obviously it's probably just worth raising that it was just a pool area that was kind of closed during this period. All our dry side activities were still maintained, and obviously, as Councillor Latty says, the overall project now and what we have there with the cafe, the library and the lights is a fantastic kind of building now, and a community asset that we kind of strongly kind of, and obviously are seeing pre-COVID times in terms of usage coming through, that is substantial as well. So we're really proud of what has been achieved, but obviously there's a number of learning points that we've kind of will take on board through that point.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Phil and Steve. Although I must admit, coming back to one of the points, I don't see how much specific design experience you need not to take load-bearing walls from beneath a concrete floor. Right, okay, if there are no more... Sorry, Graham, are you waving your hand at me? Yeah, it looks as though you are. You want to come back in?
Briefly, yes, I accept that the leisure centre in total wasn't closed, but to the people locally it was. It looked closed, you know, the fences around it and all that sort of thing. And the schools, who were the biggest users, well, not biggest users, but who used the pool to a large extent, to them it was closed as well. And that was quite a big deal locally.
Yeah, and in the working group we did touch upon the impact on schools and that essential life skill of learning to swim and how that was interrupted. Okay, in the absence of any other comments, I'll bring this item to a close. A number of things. First of all, I think we've dealt with it. I don't think the board, from what people have been saying, and is minded to pursue this any further. I think we've had the session in the working group, we've had another go at it today, and I don't think there's the indication from anyone that we need to pursue it any further. Second point is that I'm sure that Angela will get together with Andy to come up with a synopsis of the issues that we've discussed today, in addition to what we discussed in the working group and the lessons to be learned, and hopefully they will reflect any extra dimensions that we've injected into that. So if no one's got any other comments, I'll bring the discussion on this particular item to a close, and we'll move on to agenda item 10, the work schedule. Angela, I don't know if there's anything you want to bring to our attention in particular on this.
No, Chair. I mean, this is the usual work schedule report, asking the board to consider the work for the remainder of the municipal year. So the latest version of the schedule is set out in Appendix 1 for members' consideration. So members are asked to consider and agree or make any further suggested amendments to the work schedule at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I don't think any surprises in there unless anyone's got any other comments to make. Can we approve the work schedule? Yeah, lots of nods. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the meeting, and thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance and your contributions. And we will get together again with our proper chair in position, I think, in January. January the 5th.